HR slid a red folder across the table and said, "Sign here, we're done." Evan Crossley, Chief Executive Officer, didn't even look up when he nodded. "She's become a liability," he said flatly, loud enough for everyone to hear. The word was chosen carefully sharp, dismissive, and meant to humiliate. My team sat frozen as I was erased in the same room I had led for 21 years. The meeting was labeled Future Restructuring. That was the warning. Nothing else. Evan leaned back in his chair, the posture of a man who never paid for his own mistakes, and spoke about younger instincts and Gen Z velocity. Then he delivered the line meant to land hardest. "We can't afford to let outdated people slow us down." He looked directly at me when he said outdated, as if experience had suddenly become a defect. My name is Tilda Vaughn. Until that moment, I was the senior operations lead, the name attached to every compliance approval, every risk escalation, every decision that carried legal weight. When systems failed, regulators called my office. When clients threatened action, my signature sat at the bottom of the file. Evan made decisions. I absorbed consequences. He gestured toward my replacement like unveiling a prototype. "This is Alyssa Reed," he announced. "She's fast. Alyssa, 25, leaned forward immediately. "I'll optimize everything," she said, stacking buzzwords like credentials, agile, lean, scalable. She never once asked who carried liability, because she never had. Evan tapped the table once. "You'll hand over immediately." HR pushed a checklist toward me: access revocation, credential transfer, system ownership. 30 minutes? Clean exit, Evan added. No drama. I looked around the room. The people avoiding my eyes were the same ones who had called me late at night, panicked, begging me to fix what they didn't understand. Evan looked relaxed. Why wouldn't he be? Risk had never belonged to him. I stood, gathering my notes, feeling the pressure of being erased on command. As I turned to leave, I caught Mark Holloway from legal at the far end of the table. He studied the surface in front of him, jaw tight, refusing to meet my eyes. That hesitation told me everything. They hadn't just fired me. They had removed the only person legally standing between Evan Crossley's confidence and the consequences he was about to inherit. If this moment stirred something in you, pause for a beat and check in. How's your body feeling right now? Gently roll your neck and shoulders in a slow circle, just once or twice. Like you're easing out a long day at work, it can release more tension than you expect. Tell me where you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories reach. And if you want to hear what happens after a choice like this, stay with me and subscribe, because the next move changes everything. 21 years can disappear in a single afternoon if the right people decide your history has become inconvenient. I walked out of that conference room with a polite smile on my face, while something tight and furious pressed against my ribs. They called it restructuring. To me, it felt like erasure, deliberate and personal. I had saved this company 3 times when lawyers were already circling. The first was a regulatory breach no one else noticed until I stopped it from becoming public. The second involved a client contract written badly enough to trigger penalties that would have gutted our annual revenue. The third came during a compliance audit where one wrong answer could have shut us down for months. Each time, my signature closed the file. Each time, my name absorbed the risk. That was my role, not visionary, not flashy, responsible. Evan Crossley never liked that kind of work. As Chief Executive Officer, he loved speed, headlines, and movement. He hated pauses, questions, and people who remembered why systems existed. To Evan, experience wasn't stability, it was friction. I watched his impatience grow over the years, especially when younger hires nodded quickly and promised solutions without asking what those solutions would cost. He didn't want resistance, he wanted momentum. Alyssa Reed fit that appetite perfectly. She moved fast, spoke faster, and touched everything the moment she was told she could. She never asked. "Who is accountable for this?" she asked. "Do I have permission to change it?" When Evan said yes, that was enough for her. I could see the confidence in her posture, the belief that access meant authority. No one corrected that assumption. Human resources made it worse. They wrapped cruelty in neutrality, using phrases like role realignment and operational continuity. The woman across from me kept her voice even, her eyes fixed on her laptop. "This is standard procedure," she said, sliding forms forward. No acknowledgement of tenure, no recognition of contribution, just process, clean, cold, efficient. As I packed up years of institutional memory into a cardboard box, my anger sharpened into something clearer. I replayed the meeting, every word, every omission. Evan talked about transition, but no one explained who would carry the responsibility I was leaving behind. HR talked about access removal, but never mentioned liability reassignment. Alyssa talked about improvements, but never once asked what she was inheriting. That was when it hit me. There was no document, no signature, no formal transfer of legal responsibility. I was still the last authorized holder for systems that could trigger regulatory action if mishandled. They had removed the person, not the obligation, in their rush to move forward. They had skipped the one step that actually mattered. I stopped in the hallway, box in my arms, and laughed once, quietly. 21 years hadn't been erased. They had been abandoned. And abandonment, in a system built on accountability, always comes back to collect its debt. The betrayal wasn't emotional alone, it was structural. They chose convenience over continuity, speed over safety. In doing so, they handed me clarity. I didn't need to argue or protest. I only needed to remember exactly how responsibility works when no one wants it until it's missing. And that realization settled in my chest. Heavy, irreversible, and decisive. I left the building the way I had entered it for years, without ceremony, without witnesses, and without giving anyone the satisfaction of a reaction. My badge was already dead. My name was already removed from the directory. The silence followed me all the way to the parking garage, heavy but clean, like a door closing behind a decision that could not be undone. I did not call a lawyer. I did not call a friend. I did not rehearse arguments in my head or imagine speeches I would never give. That kind of noise belonged to people who still thought this was about feelings. I had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous moments in a company's life arrive quietly, disguised as efficiency. At home, I placed the cardboard box on the kitchen table and sat down across from it. 21 years reduced to files, notebooks, and a framed photo I did not bother to turn face up. I made coffee, not because I needed it, but because routine steadied my hands. I felt calm in a way that surprised me, the kind of calm that comes after you stop expecting fairness. I opened my laptop and logged into my personal archive. Every contract I had ever reviewed, every escalation email forwarded to me after midnight, every authorization memo signed when someone else did not want their name attached. I was methodical, not angry. Anger wastes time. Precision does not. Responsibility does not vanish just because a company decides it prefers a different face. It lingers, anchored to signatures, approvals, and authority chains that cannot be undone by enthusiasm. I knew this because I had explained it to executives more times than I could count. Today, they had chosen not to listen. I read through my original employment agreement. Then the amendments layered on over 2 decades. Operational authority, risk acknowledgement, emergency override permissions. Each clause placed me exactly where I remembered being. Then I moved to email. The messages were older than I expected. Conversations with legal, marked urgent, written in careful language. I scrolled slowly, letting the context return. Audits, exceptions, temporary measures that became permanent because someone needed a problem solved before morning. My role had never been symbolic. It had been structural. Halfway through a thread, I stopped. The email was from Legal Affairs. Years ago, sent after a rushed systems expansion. The subject line was dull, forgettable. The sentence inside was not. Responsibility remains with the last authorized holder until formal reassignment. I read it again, then once more, letting the words settle without emotion. There was no bitterness in that sentence, no warning, just fact. They had removed me from the building, not from the framework that held their operations together. I closed the laptop and leaned back, listening to the quiet of my house. No ringing phone, no apologies, no panic yet. That would come later. When someone realized that confidence does not sign documents and optimism does not carry liability. I did not smile. I did not feel victorious. I felt clear. They believed my exit meant closure. What it actually created was exposure. Clean and measurable. The kind that waits patiently, doing nothing, until the moment it is called upon. And when that moment arrived, there would be no shouting, no chaos, only one unanswered question moving steadily toward the people who thought they had finished with me. I set the box aside, turned off the light, and went to bed knowing systems remember what people try to forget, and accountability knows where to find its name. At this point, do you feel something is about to happen from the outside? My exit looked clean. Inside the company, nothing slowed down, it sped up. Alyssa Reed moved through systems the way new hires are encouraged to, touching everything with confidence and leaving fingerprints everywhere. She didn't pause to ask why controls existed. She asked whether she was allowed to change them, and Evan Crossley always said yes. Speed made him feel decisive. He urged momentum in meetings, in emails, in late-night calls. Repeating that hesitation was the real risk now. I wasn't there, but I could picture it clearly. Dashboards lighting up, permissions expanding, processes shortened because they felt old. One approval layer removed because it took too long. Each change was small on its own, defensible if isolated, almost invisible to anyone who didn't understand how the pieces leaned on each other. That was the danger. High-risk systems don't fail loudly at first. They shift. They drift. Alyssa rerouted an escalation path so alerts went to her instead of legal review. Evan approved it within minutes. "We don't need bottlenecks," he said. No one argued. Bottlenecks were what they called safeguards now, Mark Holloway noticed. As internal counsel, he had spent years watching me intercept problems before they reached his desk. Without that buffer, patterns looked different. He saw access logs changing too quickly, responsibility matrices left incomplete, sign-off language quietly edited. It wasn't a crisis yet, but it was trending toward one. He raised the question in a meeting I later learned about. Calm voice, neutral words. "Who is currently listed as the responsible authority for these systems?" he asked. The room stalled. Evan waved it away. "We'll formalize it later," he said. "Right now, we need progress." Progress became the excuse for everything. Alyssa pushed another update live before the end of the week. It improved response time and impressed leadership. No one checked the downstream effect. No one asked who would answer if the improvement triggered scrutiny. That question had belonged to me, and I was gone. The first external signal arrived quietly, the way serious problems usually do. A long-term partner sent an email asking for updated liability confirmation after noticing configuration changes. The wording was polite. The implication was not. They wanted to know who stood behind the decisions being made now. That message circulated longer than it should have. Evan skimmed it and forwarded it to operations with a note about handling it internally. Mark read it twice. He recognized the phrasing. Partners only asked that question when their own lawyers were paying attention. Still, no one stopped the changes. Speed had become identity. Slowing down felt like admitting doubt. I watched the situation unfold later, through forwarded threads and second-hand accounts, seeing exactly where caution could have intervened and didn't. From the outside, I remained silent. From the inside, tension was building, invisible to people measuring success by motion alone. Systems were adjusting to leadership's impatience, and impatience always leaves a trace. The company believed it was moving forward. What it was actually doing was stepping closer to a question it could not answer yet, one that would demand a name, a signature, and a level of responsibility no amount of enthusiasm could replace. I understood this pattern because I had lived inside it for decades, absorbing pressure so others could move freely. Every shortcut leaves a shadow. Every acceleration creates friction somewhere unseen. They mistook silence for absence and calm for irrelevance. What they were building now depended on foundations they no longer acknowledged. I did nothing to interfere, nothing to warn them, because systems reveal their weaknesses on schedule. All I had to do was wait, knowing the question Mark asked would return louder, sharper, and impossible to dismiss when answers were required. That certainty settled quietly, replacing anger with patience, and patience with the confidence that accountability never forgets its obligations entirely, eventually. Listen closely, the next small detail changed everything. The first sign of trouble did not arrive as a warning or an alarm. It arrived as an internal audit notification, quietly triggered and automatically scheduled, the kind no one panics over until it refuses to go away. I heard about it later, through a forwarded message and a clipped phone call that ended too quickly. That was when I knew the surface had finally cracked. Inside the company, Alyssa Reed was the first to feel it. She had been moving fast for weeks, pushing changes through systems with Evan's encouragement and HR's silence. When the audit request landed on her desk, she reacted the way confident people do when confronted with limits. She tried to sign. The system rejected her. Again. And again. "Why won't this accept my approval?" she asked in an operations chat. No one answered right away. Someone suggested a permissions refresh. Someone else blamed a lag. The truth was simpler. Alyssa did not have the authority to certify high-risk compliance. She never had. Human resources tried next. They always do. HR forwarded the request with neutral language, asking operations to resolve ownership. Ownership was not something HR possessed. They managed exits, not accountability. When the audit system required a legally recognized signature, their access ended where responsibility began. That was when Mark Holloway stepped in. As internal counsel, he understood what the others were still avoiding. He requested the transfer documentation, formally and in writing. "Please provide the responsibility reassignment file associated with Tilda Vaughn's departure," he wrote. The inbox stayed quiet longer than it should have. Evan Crossley noticed the delay and grew irritated. He hated pauses. "Why are we stuck on this?" he asked in a meeting. "Just get it done." Mark kept his voice even. "We can't proceed without the proper handover," he said. Evan waved it off. "She's gone. We've moved on." But systems don't move on. They wait. When Mark confirmed there was no reassignment file, the room shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. The way people adjust their posture when they realize a chair might not be there. Evan's tone sharpened. "So create one," he snapped. Mark shook his head. "It doesn't work retroactively." Alyssa sat quietly, suddenly aware that speed had brought her to a door she couldn't open. "I thought I was authorized," she said. No one contradicted her. Authorization had been assumed, not granted. That distinction mattered now. Emails multiplied. Compliance asked for confirmation. Operations asked legal. Legal asked HR. HR asked operations. The circle tightened without producing an answer. Evan began sending messages in all caps, demanding resolution. "This is a non-issue." One read. It wasn't. The audit system flagged the delay. Automatically. That flag carried weight. It meant escalation, review, and questions that could not be deflected with optimism. Mark knew what came next. He had seen it before in other companies, usually after someone left too fast and took clarity with them. In a private conversation, he told Evan the words Evan did not want to hear. "We may need external counsel." Evan bristled. For what Mark didn't soften it. To assess personal exposure. That was the moment anxiety crossed into fear. External lawyers do not exist to protect feelings. They exist to assign responsibility. Once involved, they ask one question before all others. Who is legally accountable right now? And if no one can answer, they find the person who should have been. The issue was forwarded, discreetly, to outside counsel. No announcement, no memo. Just a quiet shift in direction that signaled something had gone wrong. The company was no longer managing a process. It was managing risk. From where I stood, unseen and untouched. The pattern was unmistakable. The first crack had appeared, not as collapse, but as hesitation. And hesitation, in a system built on signatures, is how panic begins. They still believed this could be contained, corrected quietly, absorbed without consequence. That belief was fragile. Once auditors pause, time changes. Silence becomes evidence, and unanswered forms become pressure. Pressing harder with every hour, no one can sign legally. The night before, everything broke. The company went quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Not calm, suspended. I was not there to see it. But years inside those walls had trained me to recognize the feeling when it arrived. Systems do not panic. People do. And when people panic, they reach for voices they thought they had silenced. Evan Crossley called me first. I learned that later. He tried once, then again, growing less careful with each attempt. His calls went straight to voicemail. My number already filed away as irrelevant by a company that believed removal was the same as resolution. I was asleep when the phone lit up, undisturbed, unaware that urgency was stacking itself on the other side of silence, while Evan waited for a response that did not come. External counsel was reviewing what internal teams could not explain away. They traced authorization chains, compared timestamps, and matched signatures to responsibilities that had never been reassigned. It did not take long for them to identify the exposure. They were trained to spot it. A gap like that was not an oversight. It was a liability waiting for daylight. Evan was confident when the call began. He always was. He framed the situation as procedural noise, a delay that could be smoothed over with the right wording. The lawyer did not argue. He asked questions instead. Who currently held responsibility? Who had signed the last compliance approval? Who could certify the changes made since my departure? Evan answered too quickly, then stopped answering at all. The conversation shifted. Tone flattened. Legal language replaced reassurance. The lawyer explained that, without a formal transfer, responsibility did not dissolve. It concentrated. And because Evan had authorized the changes, because he had pushed for speed over documentation, that concentration pointed uncomfortably close to him. That was the risk Evan had never carried before. He made decisions. Yes, but decisions were insulated by people like me. Now the insulation was gone. The lawyer said it plainly. This may be personal. Evan did not respond right away. At home, I slept through all of it. My phone remained untouched on the nightstand. The house was still. I did not sense the shift because I did not need to. Calm had become my default. I had reviewed the documents, understood the structure, and accepted the outcome. Whatever came next would arrive on its own schedule. The lawyer ended the call with Evan by stating the obvious next step. They needed clarity. Clarity required confirmation, and confirmation could only come from one place. The person whose name still anchored the responsibility chain, the person no longer employed, but still legally relevant. He hesitated before saying it. Then he made the decision. I will contact her directly. That choice mattered. It crossed a line Evan had tried to avoid, the line between authority and accountability. Evan protested, weakly. But the lawyer was done negotiating. This was no longer about corporate optics. It was about exposure. The number was dialed, my number, the same one Evan had tried to reach and failed. The lawyer did not expect an answer immediately. He left no message. He did not need to. He knew when to call back. I woke the next morning, unaware that a threshold had been crossed while I slept. The storm had not broken yet, but it had organized itself, quietly, precisely, around a question no one inside the company could answer without me, that night. The silence was not empty. It was full of decisions made without understanding, pressure building without release, and certainty forming where confidence used to be. The call would come soon, and when it did, it would not be from a man trying to fix his mistake, but from someone whose job was to measure the cost of it. If you were me at this moment, what would you do? Leave a comment below. 3 a.m. is not a time for conversation. It is a time reserved for emergencies, for hospitals, for calls that rewrite the shape of your day before it begins. When my phone rang, The sound cut through sleep with surgical precision. Not loud, not frantic, just persistent enough to demand attention. I reached for it without urgency. My body felt steady, my thoughts clear. I expected silence on the other end. Maybe a wrong number. Maybe nothing at all. The screen showed an unfamiliar area code. I answered. Ms. Vaughn, a man said, calm and fully awake. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm external counsel retained by your former employer. It was not Evan. That absence mattered immediately. Evan Crossley called when he wanted control. Lawyers called when control was already slipping. Yes, I said. There was no greeting beyond that, no apology for the hour. People who work at this level don't waste time pretending courtesy matters when liability is involved. He went straight to it. Mrs. Vaughn, are you currently the legal responsibility holder for this system? The question landed cleanly, without accusation or tone. It was the kind of question designed to have only one correct answer. I sat up, letting the quiet of my bedroom settle around me. The clock glowed faintly on the wall. Everything else was still. I am, I said, as of my termination. No reassignment documentation has been executed. I did not explain. I did not defend. I did not speculate. I stated fact. There was silence on the line. Not the awkward kind. The professional kind. The kind where someone is recalculating risk in real time. I could hear his breathing, controlled, measured. He was confirming something he already suspected. He spoke again, slower now, to be clear. You did not sign any transfer of responsibility prior to your departure, numbers, I said. I was not presented with one. Another pause. Longer this time. Somewhere. Someone else was probably listening in. Muted. Taking notes. I imagined documents open on a desk. Authorization chains highlighted. Dates circled in red. This was no longer a conversation. It was an assessment. Then your termination created a serious exposure, he said. The words were not dramatic. They didn't need to be. They were precise. And precision carries weight. I felt nothing spike inside me. No satisfaction, no fear, just confirmation. He continued, explaining what I already knew. Without a formal reassignment, responsibility remained with the last authorized holder. Changes made since my departure, particularly those approved under executive directive, carried unresolved liability, the audit delay, the unanswered confirmation requests, the involvement of external counsel, all of it traced back to a single missing step. I need to document your confirmation, he said. You may be contacted again. I understand, I replied. He thanked me and ended the call. No follow-up questions, no negotiation. He had what he needed. I sat there for a moment, phone resting in my hand, listening to the house breathe around me. The night felt unchanged, but I knew better. A line had been crossed, not by me, but because of me, or more accurately, because of what they chose to remove without understanding what it supported. I did not call Evan back. I did not check messages. Whatever panic was unfolding elsewhere did not require my participation yet. The truth had been stated. That was enough. When I lay back down, sleep did not return immediately, not because I was restless, but because my mind was alert, quietly assembling the next sequence. This was the point where consequences stopped being theoretical, where confidence met documentation and lost. 3 a.m. had done its work. The system had asked its question, received its answer, and begun its response. And for the first time since I had been fired, I understood exactly how this would end. The panic did not arrive all at once. It seeped in, waking Evan Crossley before his alarm, before daylight, before his mind had time to arrange excuses. His phone vibrated again on the nightstand. Relentless now, the kind of sound that suggests something has already moved beyond control. When he answered, the voice on the line was calm, practiced, and entirely uninterested in reassurance. The lawyer spoke first, not loudly, not urgently. He explained risk the way surgeons explain damage, clinically and without drama. Evan listened, sitting upright, his confidence draining with every sentence. Personal exposure, unassigned responsibility. Decisions authorized without legal insulation. Each phrase stripped away another layer of distance Evan had always relied on. Evan tried to interrupt. "This is procedural," he said. "We terminated her role. That should transfer, it does not," the lawyer replied. "Termination does not dissolve responsibility, it concentrates it." That was the moment Evan understood he was no longer protected by hierarchy. The buffer was gone. The woman he had dismissed as outdated had been standing between him and consequence. Now there was nothing but documentation and time. He called me immediately. Once. Then again. Then 3 times more. Each call sharper than the last. My phone lit up on the nightstand, vibrating into silence, his name flashing like a warning. I did not answer. Not because I wanted revenge, but because nothing useful could be said yet. Panic produces noise, not solutions. While Evan paced his bedroom, the lawyer continued outlining scenarios: audit escalation, regulatory inquiry, board disclosure. None of it sounded abstract anymore. Evan asked what could be done. The answer was precise and limited. "We need confirmation," the lawyer said, "and we need to inform governance." The word governance landed hard. Evan had spent years treating the board as ceremonial, a formality that approved what he framed correctly. Now they were a risk surface, obligated, curious, dangerous. He called me again. Voicemail. He texted. Short messages at first, then longer ones. "We need to talk. This is urgent. Please call me." Each one went unanswered, dissolving into the quiet of my bedroom while I watched the ceiling and waited. The lawyer moved on. "Given the circumstances, the board of directors must be notified," he said. "This exposure cannot be managed unilaterally." Evan protested, voice rising. "That will cause panic. It will cause oversight," the lawyer replied. "Which is required." The call ended without ceremony. Evan sat alone, phone in hand, realizing he was no longer directing events. He was reacting to them, somewhere else. Emails were being drafted, language tightened, responsibility mapped. The board would ask questions Evan could not answer without me. I knew none of this in real time. I only knew my phone kept vibrating, my name being pulled into urgency I had not created. I let it ring. Silence was not avoidance. It was timing. Eventually, the call slowed, not because the situation improved, but because Evan ran out of leverage. He could not force a response. He could only wait. The way systems wait when a required input is missing. By the time the board was informed, the narrative had already shifted. This was no longer about restructuring or innovation. It was about accountability gaps and executive exposure, the kind of conversation that ends careers quietly. I turned the phone face down and closed my eyes. Panic was spreading elsewhere, collapsing structures built on assumption. I felt none of it directly. I felt distance, clarity, the knowledge that once governance is involved, outcomes are no longer personal, they are procedural, and procedures do not negotiate. The collapse had begun, not with shouting or scandal, but with unanswered calls and informed directors. Evan had believed speed would protect him. Now speed had outrun him, leaving him exposed to the very system he thought he controlled. By dawn, the company would wake to oversight emails and calendar invites marked confidential. But Evan would already know the truth. Control does not vanish loudly. It erodes when authority meets responsibility without a shield. And the gap becomes visible to those trained to count consequences instead of promises. That recognition settles slowly. Then suddenly, when options narrow and silence answers, he reached out the way people do when they believe leverage still belongs to them. Not with humility, not with clarity, but with offers stacked like bargaining chips. By the time Evan Crossley finally got through, the tone of his voice had changed completely. Gone was the executive certainty. In its place was urgency wrapped in forced calm. "Let's be practical. Tilda," he said. "This doesn't need to get complicated. We spoke by phone. His choice, not mine. I let him talk first. That was the new balance of power. He started with money, a number high enough to sound respectful, low enough to reveal fear. We can compensate you for the inconvenience, he said, as if 21 years of responsibility could be reframed as a scheduling issue. I didn't react. Silence made him uncomfortable. So he kept going. Your old title could be restored, he offered. Senior advisory role, full access, we'll make it right. I pictured the organizational chart he was trying to reconstruct in his head, plugging me back in like a removed component. He needed my name, not my presence, my signature, not my voice. Then came the paper. There would be an NDA. Of course, he added quickly. Standard protection for everyone involved. Protection. That word again. I waited until he finished listing incentives before I spoke, not because I was considering them, but because I wanted him fully exposed in the asking. Who takes responsibility when everything collapses? I asked. He hesitated. That's not what's happening. It is, I said. So I'll ask again. Who is responsible when the system fails under changes you authorized? He tried to redirect. That's why we want you back. To stabilize things. That's not an answer, I replied. Silence stretched between us, thick and revealing. Evan had always avoided this part of conversations. He preferred vision to consequence. But vision doesn't hold liability. You would be covered, he said finally. We'd handle the exposure. I almost laughed. Almost. You already handled it, I said. That's why you're calling. The contempt I felt surprised even me. Not anger, not bitterness. Contempt is colder. It arrives when respect has already left the room. He shifted tactics. What do you want? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't negotiate numbers. I asked for clarity. I want accountability to be visible. I said, not buried, not reassigned quietly. That's not how these things are done, he snapped. Losing control again. That's how they're ending, I replied. I explained my conditions slowly, deliberately. No private reinstatement, no quiet fix. Any acknowledgement of responsibility would be documented, reviewed, and disclosed to governance. No non-disclosure agreements shielding decisions already made. If my name was still attached to liability, then the truth would be attached to authority. You're trying to humiliate me, he said. No, I said. I'm trying to make it accurate. That distinction mattered. Humiliation is personal. Accuracy is structural. He argued. He warned. He hinted at consequences he no longer had the power to enforce. Each attempt revealed how far the balance had shifted. The man who once dismissed me as outdated was now negotiating for protection. When the call ended, nothing was agreed. That was the point. I had not refused him out of emotion. I had refused him because leverage no longer lived where he thought it did. The offer was his attempt to reverse time, to return to a version of events where speed erased responsibility. But time had already moved forward. And now, responsibility was the only currency left. I set the phone down, steady and unmoved. The next steps would not be mine alone. They would be public, procedural, and irreversible. Power does not always announce when it changes hands. Sometimes it simply asks the right question and waits for the wrong person to answer. The emergency meeting did not feel dramatic. It felt inevitable. By the time I joined the call, the tone had already shifted from damage control to record keeping. This was no longer about saving face. It was about establishing truth before it was forced into existence by someone outside the room. The chair opened without pleasantries. We are here to clarify responsibility, she said. Not strategy, not vision, responsibility. That single word changed the posture of everyone present. Evan Crossley sat rigid, no longer at the center, no longer directing. His camera stayed on, but his authority did not. Legal spoke first, calm, precise. They outlined the timeline of decisions, approvals, and omissions. They named documents. They referenced dates. Each sentence narrowed the field until there was nowhere left to stand. When my name came up, it was not accusatory. It was factual. Last authorized holder. No reassignment executed. Exposure created. I was invited to speak, not as an employee, but as a point of reference. I explained what I had always explained. Responsibility follows authorization, not enthusiasm. You cannot outrun it. You can only transfer it deliberately. No one interrupted me. Evan tried once. This was an operational oversight, he said, forcing confidence into his voice. We moved quickly to stay competitive. The chair stopped him. Speed is not a defense, she said. Authority requires containment. That was the moment the room turned. Evan's words stopped carrying weight. Questions no longer flowed through him. They moved around him. Directors asked legal for confirmation, not reassurance. They asked operations who had signed, not who had acted. Alyssa spoke quietly when addressed. Her certainty was gone. I thought I had approval, she said. Her voice shook, not from guilt, but from realization. Approval was not protection. Execution was not ownership. She had moved systems because she was told she could. She had never been told she would answer for them. Human resources attempted to frame the situation procedurally. The termination followed policy, they said. The chair nodded. Policy governs exits, she replied. Not accountability. The distinction landed hard. Policy had been Evan's shield. Accountability was now his exposure. Legal summarized their findings. The gap was clear. Responsibility had remained with me by default. Decisions made after my removal carried unresolved risk. Governance had not been informed. That failure rested with executive leadership. Silence followed. Not shock. Acceptance. Evan finally spoke again. What are you recommending? He asked. The answer was immediate. Recusal. Legal said. Effective immediately. It was not dramatic. It was procedural. Evan was instructed to step back from all decision-making pending review. His access would be limited. His authority paused. The chair confirmed it without hesitation. Evan protested. Briefly, it did not matter. No one responded. I watched the screen as power realigned itself. Not violently, cleanly. Alyssa stared at her notes, understanding at last that speed without shelter leaves you alone when systems ask questions. Evan stared forward, seeing the distance between command and consequence for the first time. The meeting closed with next steps. Oversight committees, documentation review, interim leadership. My role was finished there. I had served my purpose by telling the truth. The board did not thank anyone. Gratitude was irrelevant here. Their concern was continuity, credibility, and containment. Decisions were assigned deadlines. Communications were approved line by line. Every action now carried witnesses. This was governance doing what it exists to do when confidence fails. I felt no triumph watching it happen, only relief. The kind that comes when weight is finally placed where it belongs, not shifted downward or disguised as progress. Public accountability does not shout. It records. It corrects. It leaves no room for performance. And when it appears, quietly and precisely, it changes everything without asking permission. Evan's forced retreat was not announced as punishment. It was framed as necessity. Governance responding to risk. That framing mattered. It preserved the system while exposing the choice that had caused the damage. Justice, in this form, was not emotional. It was structural, final, and impossible to argue with once documented in records, minutes, and decisions that would outlive everyone in that meeting. Long after voices faded and authority shifted permanently, irrevocably, I did not watch Evan Crossley lose his position in real time. By the time the decision reached me, it was already procedural, already signed, already inevitable. There was no announcement meant for drama, no spectacle for satisfaction. His name simply stopped appearing where authority used to sit. The board framed it as a transition, but everyone understood what it meant. Evan was removed from executive control and stripped of decision rights pending review. Interim leadership stepped in within hours. Access privileges were adjusted. Calendars changed. The machine corrected itself with quiet efficiency. Oversight followed immediately. External auditors remained engaged. Internal reporting lines tightened. Every decision now required 2 signatures where one had once been enough. The company did not collapse. It contracted, stabilizing under supervision like a structure reinforced after stress fractures appear. That, more than anything, confirmed how fragile Evan's confidence-driven speed had been. People asked whether I would return. Some asked directly. Others asked through careful intermediaries, testing the idea without committing to it. The answer was always the same. No. I had not been pushed out to be pulled back in as a remedy. My role had ended when responsibility was ignored, and I refused to pretend otherwise. I watched from a distance as governance did its work. Not revenge, not retribution, just consequence. Evan's absence changed conversations instantly. Meetings slowed. Questions surfaced that had been suppressed for years. Alyssa remained, quieter now, learning the difference between permission and protection the hard way. She was not blamed. She was educated by the process itself. There was satisfaction in that, but not pleasure. I did not feel joy watching someone fall. I felt alignment. The system finally reflected reality instead of ambition. Accountability had moved upward where it belonged, and for the first time in years. No one was asking me to absorb risk they did not want to see. The company entered a monitored phase. Regulators were informed. Partners were reassured with documentation instead of promises. Evan's name appeared only in past tense, referenced in reports that focused on gaps rather than personalities. That distance mattered. It meant the story was no longer about individuals. It was about structure. I declined every invitation to comment publicly. Silence remained my most accurate response. I had said what needed to be said when it counted. To the people trained to listen, anything more would have been unnecessary. Then the call came. Unexpected, but not surprising. A different company, a different tone. They had followed the situation closely, understood the exposure, and recognized the value of someone who had held responsibility without applause. The offer was simple, clear authority, defined accountability, no illusion of speed without support. I did not accept immediately. I asked questions. I reviewed documents. I made sure responsibility and authority aligned on paper before they ever aligned in practice. When I finally agreed, it was with calm certainty, not relief. Evan's fall was complete by then. The company he left behind continued, changed but intact. I moved forward without looking back. Satisfaction, I learned, does not come from watching someone lose power. It comes from refusing to return to a system that taught you exactly why you should never accept less than clarity again. I carried no trophies from this outcome, only perspective earned through pressure. Power that depends on avoidance always collapses when attention sharpens. What remained with me was discipline, the habit of checking structures instead of trusting narratives. I understood now that silence can be strategic without being cruel, and distance can be respectful without being weak. The fall was complete not because someone lost a title, but because a system corrected its imbalance. That correction allowed me to step forward cleanly, unburdened, choosing my next responsibility with eyes open, steady hands, and no interest in returning to any place that confuses speed with strength. Ever again, under any circumstances or pressure. I began my new role without ceremony, the way real work usually starts. There was no announcement, no applause, no curious stares following me down hallways. Just a desk, a clear mandate, and documents that matched authority to responsibility without ambiguity. That alignment felt unfamiliar at first. Like standing on stable ground after years of compensating for cracks no one else wanted to see. The company did not ask me to fix chaos. They asked me to prevent it. My title was precise. My scope was defined. Every system I touched had a name attached to it. And every name carried consequences. It was quiet work, deliberate work, the kind that never makes headlines because it rarely fails. That suited me. I did not celebrate Evan's removal. I did not replay meetings in my head or imagine different endings. What happened to him belonged to governance, not to me. Justice had already done its work by placing responsibility where it should have been all along. My satisfaction came from knowing I no longer had to hold up a structure designed to lean on denial. People sometimes mistake restraint for forgiveness. They are not the same. I did not forgive what happened, and I did not need to. Forgiveness is emotional, closure is structural. I achieved the latter by choosing environments that respect process over performance and documentation over charm. Occasionally, someone asks if I regret not fighting harder when I was dismissed. I always answer the same way. I did fight. I fought by understanding the system better than the people trying to outrun it. I fought by letting accountability surface naturally, without interference or spectacle. The system did the rest. My days now are measured differently, not by urgency, but by clarity, not by volume, but by precision. I read carefully. I sign deliberately. I ask questions before approving changes, and I expect real answers. That discipline is not defensive. It is sustainable. Looking back, I see the arc clearly. Silence was not weakness. Distance was not surrender. Both were tools, used at the right moment, to allow truth to emerge without distortion. Power that relies on speed alone always exposes itself eventually. Power grounded in responsibility endures. Justice, I learned, does not announce itself with noise or celebration, but with balance restored and records corrected. When systems align, people feel relief rather than triumph, and outcomes speak quietly for themselves over time without drama or lingering resentment. I did not win by taking something from someone else. I won by refusing to carry weight that was never mine to bear. In the end, that distinction mattered more than any title ever could. Speed impresses. Responsibility decides who survives. What this story taught me wasn't about revenge or winning. It was about where responsibility truly lives. I learned that silence can be stronger than argument, that walking away with clarity beats staying to prove a point, and that systems always reveal who respected them and who tried to outrun them. The most painful moments weren't loud. They were quiet decisions made when no one was watching, when it would have been easier to stay comfortable instead of correct. Living through that taught me dignity isn't something you demand, it's something you keep. I'm curious which detail stayed with you the most. And is there anything you would have done differently in my place? Where are you listening from right now if this story resonated? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. A like or share helps these stories reach people who need them, and subscribing keeps you with me for the next one. Thank you for listening.